operates.
Chris, thank you again. Chris Mason, our political editor there with the latest for us in Downing Street. Well, from Downing Street, let's go to Windsor, because Windsor, of course, dominated by the great castle. And Windsor, I think it's fair to say, as our understanding goes, is the Queen's favourite residence, though she loves Balmoral as well. But at Windsor, our correspondent Helena Wilkinson has been there for us today. Looks slightly better weather-wise than it was earlier, Helena. What is your sense there of the way that the local community in Windsor, which has such a close bond with the royal family because of the proximity there, what's your sense of what people are saying in Windsor itself?
Yes, absolutely, Hugh. And for those who don't know, Windsor Castle is right in the centre of Windsor. Just down the road is the high street full of shops. And local people, residents in Windsor, very much view the Queen as one of their neighbours, as a local resident. In previous years, she was often seen in the Great Park around here. We've spoken to a number of people here on the high street, some emotional at the news of the Queen's health, and also many people just anxious to hear how she is. We haven't had another update from the palace since the one we got at just after 12:30 this afternoon. Lots of visitors coming out of the castle gates here. Some of them told us that they had heard the news from inside the grounds, others emerging not having heard. We know, of course, that the Queen spent much of the last 2.5 years here at the castle. As you mentioned, Hugh, this is perhaps her most favourite royal residence. It's a lot of green space around here. It's somewhere where she loves to be. And she spent the last years of her husband's life, the Duke of Edinburgh, during lockdown. They remained here together, spending day after day together. They celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary in November 2020. She, of course, made that trip, which is traditional for the Queen, to spend the summer months at Balmoral. She left here at Windsor Castle in July, and the Queen would traditionally return here to the castle in October. But the sense this evening, Hugh, here, the feeling amongst locals and also visitors here, tourists here, there are some who've gathered just a bit down from where we are, is one of concern, deep concern about the Queen, wanting to know how she is, and anxiety. So I think everyone really is waiting for another statement from the palace to find out exactly how Her Majesty is.
Well, we await to see if that statement comes, Helena. Thank you very much. Helena Wilkinson there with the latest at Windsor. And of course, Windsor is where the Queen spent so much of the lockdown period, much of that with the late Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. But in July this year, the Queen decided that she really did want to maintain the tradition of spending lots of the summer at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire, in the glorious countryside there. And of course, Balmoral Castle is one of the favourite homes of the Queen, where she's spent so many happy times during her long life, going back to her childhood. And it brings back lots of memories of happy times with her parents and her sister Margaret. And of course with her family when they were young, and then growing up with Prince Philip as well, as they enjoyed the countryside and the picnics and the barbecues around Balmoral. So it's a place of great happiness for the Queen. And that's the reason she decided that she really did, despite her mobility problems and health issues, she wanted to leave Windsor in July and go to Balmoral as usual. And she is, of course, a stickler for tradition. So Buckingham Palace there on the right, very much seen as the office, if you like. That's where the working quarters are. Windsor, not too far away to the west, is really the kind of favourite home, the main home, where lots of work is also done. And then, of course, we have the other residences, Balmoral, which we are familiar with in summer. And then, of course, Sandringham in the east of England. And there are a few others too. Of course, there's Holyrood House in Edinburgh. So we are looking today at news from Balmoral. That's our focus today. It's not Buckingham Palace really, it's Balmoral, and that is where the Queen is being kept comfortable by the team of doctors who are there and who have just put that unusual statement out earlier today. Unusual because it was rather forthcoming, saying that they were concerned. They were now concerned about the state of the Queen's health, and that she was comfortable at Balmoral, that some of the family now who've arrived there to see their mother, in the case of Prince Charles and Princess Anne and Andrew and Edward, and then, of course, a grandson in the form of Duke of Cambridge. They're all there, and we imagine that they've been talking to the doctors there and have had their briefing, and one imagines that they are with the Queen, keeping her company and making sure that she's as comfortable as possible. Now, at Balmoral is my colleague James Cook, who's the BBC's Scotland editor. And James, could you bring us up to date, please, on what's been going on there?
Yes, Hugh, no sense of drama here, no sense of panic, a sense instead of a well-rehearsed plan quietly swinging into action. For most of the afternoon, it was relatively calm here. The rain teemed down, leaving the purple heather around this estate sodden. Every few minutes or so, another photographer, another reporter would cross Isambard Kingdom Brunel's bridge across the River Dee and make their way here to the gates of Balmoral. And then at 5:05, a flurry of flashbulbs as senior members of the royal family swept past us. Prince William driving a Range Rover, Prince Andrew next to him, and in the back Prince Edward and Sophie, the Countess of Wessex. I could see grim faces. Certainly Andrew, I saw clearly, very grim-faced Andrew as they drove past and into this estate, which of course has been one of the favourite places, if not the favourite place of the Queen for many, many decades of her reign. An estate, a 50,000-acre estate dating back in terms of its association with the royal family to Queen Victoria, the castle here built for her in the 1850s. And of course a place where we know the Queen has many fond memories of spending time with her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, not least because the photograph that was released by the family on his death was a photograph of the two of them together in the hills on this estate.
James, just a thought here about the Queen's relationship with Scotland as well, because of course we're at a time where there's been a lot of debate about the future shape of the United Kingdom. The Queen, of course, represents the solid element of continuity, and that's an interesting thing for us to reflect on, given her great affection for Balmoral and indeed for Scotland.
Yes, this is surely a monarch who personifies the union of the crowns of 1603 as much as she does anything else. The constancy that we talk about that applies to her reign actually goes way back before her reign in terms of the royal family's relationship with Scotland, predating the Act of Union, the Union of the Parliaments in 1707. And indeed the Queen has been a constant figure associated with that union of the crowns. Not, it has to be said, Hugh, always without controversy. And the Silver Jubilee speech, which the Queen gave in 1977 at Westminster when she talked about the benefits union had conferred at a time when the Labour Party was proposing to devolve power to Wales and to Scotland, proposals that were ultimately defeated. That certainly raised eyebrows. Eyebrows were raised in 2014 when the Queen, attending Crathy Kirk, just along from the gates of Balmoral here, talked about people considering the future, thinking very carefully about the future as they decided how to vote in the referendum on independence, which the people of Scotland ultimately rejected. The palace, of course, strongly denied that there was anything wrong with that comment, said it was a perfectly sensible thing to say, to urge people to think very carefully about such a serious issue. And of course, there is deep affection for the Queen in parts of Scotland. It is fair to say that if you look at the polling, the monarchy is not as popular north of the border as it is south of the border, but the Queen is certainly more popular than the monarchy in Scotland, and that is certainly reciprocated on her behalf. She's talked of her deep and abiding affection for this nation.
And a thought, James, as well about the place that Balmoral plays in the great royal landscape, if you like. You've mentioned the fact, and we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Queen has a great affection for it, and its heritage goes back to Queen Victoria's time. We're talking about Aberdeenshire, which of course is lots of it, very, very beautiful. The landscape there is magnificent. And as you say, very significant that rather lovely image of the Queen and the Duke, released when the Duke died, was indeed in the hills above Balmoral, on this enormous estate that the Queen has there.
Yes, that's right. And the Queen has been coming here regularly with her family for the summer and into the early autumn, year after year after year. It's very clear that this place is somewhere for which she holds extremely deep affection. We just see another police car going through the gates there of Balmoral Estate. Yes, Hugh, you're right. I mean, there is definitely an affinity. I mean, if you look back through the newsreel footage, back through the years, here she was in the 1960s, buying an ice cream for one of the young princes just along the road in one of the local shops. One of the few places really where, I'm not saying the Queen routinely walks up and down the streets of Ballater and Braemar, but it would be a place where she would not be troubled by people locally if she were to do so, because people are very used to seeing senior members of the royal family. Indeed, I remember one occasion somebody telling me that just outside these gates here, they were driving along and there was a car waiting with its indicator on to turn into the gates, and as they drove past they realised it was none other than Queen Elizabeth at the wheel.
Well, James, thank you very much. James Cook with some nice memories there of the Queen and life in Balmoral. But today we are reflecting on the state of the Queen's health, sadly, and we're just waiting to see whether Buckingham Palace or the officials at Balmoral make another statement, having said at lunchtime that the Queen's doctors are very concerned about the state of the Queen's health, that she is comfortable, that they had no more to say at that point, but they felt it necessary to convey the fear and the anxiety that was being felt. And that is why, of course, we've now seen the Duke of Cambridge, Duke of York, the Earl and Countess of Wessex, and some others making their way to Balmoral. They've arrived there. The Prince of Wales already there, and the Duchess of Cornwall too. The Princess Royal is there. So the family, the family is gathered, and we're told that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way, but he wasn't with the party that arrived a short while ago. Watching the images with me, Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, and Nick, James there was underlining the special place that Balmoral holds, because really some people may be wondering why the Queen in September is in Balmoral. Why is she not back in Windsor or even in Buckingham Palace? But it's important to underline that that's normal. That's what she does.
And she, of course, she loves to have the routine, to have the sense of confidence that you get from an unchanging routine. And so much of her year never changes. So, yes, I think the annual trip up to Balmoral is really very important to her. And it is somewhere where she feels very comfortable, very much at ease, somewhere that she has known all her life. So the time is approaching 6:30 now, isn't it? I was struck by what James Cook was saying about the grim faces that he noticed on the faces of the members of the royal family as they drove into Balmoral Castle a short time ago. We are still waiting to see if there is something from Buckingham Palace. There is nothing to report on that front at the moment, but of course that could change at a moment's notice. The situation, as we understand it at the moment, continues to be that there is widespread and deep concern about the health of the Queen. Following the statement by her doctors this morning, clearly there has been some episode which has occurred overnight, which has given rise to that concern, and which prompted the doctors and Buckingham Palace to put out a statement indicating that there is concern about the Queen's health. Members of her family have broken off and travelled to Scotland. Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall were already there. They have travelled across to Balmoral Castle, where they have also been joined by the Princess Royal. And other members of the royal family, 4 members of the royal family, have travelled up from London on an RAF flight. The Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of York, and the Earl and Countess of Wessex.
There is expectation now, clearly, Nick, if we look at the images here of Buckingham Palace, and the area in front of it dominated, of course, by the Queen Victoria Memorial at this end of the Mall. But crowds now starting to gather at those gates, where announcements in the past have been made, of course, about all kinds of things and events in the royal family's life. But I think today reflects really a crowd which is starting to gather, just basically expressing concern and just hoping for the best, is how I'd put it.
Yes, I think that is the fairest way we can put it, Hugh. Millions of people here and elsewhere will be hoping for the best, but they will be, I think, now fearing the worst and perhaps preparing for the worst. But we must continue to hope that whatever news we get from Buckingham Palace will indicate that things are okay at Balmoral. But I think that is as much really as we can say at this stage. There is great concern. That concern has been expressed by politicians at the most senior level, and they will know what the true situation is. They will have been briefed, and they will have briefed each other on Privy Council terms. So I think that that is the fairest indication that we can give to our viewers, both here and around the world at this stage, that there is, as we keep saying, there is profound concern, there is deep concern, but at this stage we do not have any further news from Buckingham Palace.
Nick, we're just looking at these images here because, of course, they are really reflecting people's deep alarm and deep concern about the fact that the Queen is extremely unwell, and of course that we are expecting the news from Balmoral that she's having treatment, or that indeed they are unable to help Her Majesty anymore. A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. To recap on the statement, the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King, that is Charles, and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Her Majesty was 96 years old. She became Queen on the 6th of February 1952, on the death of her father, King George VI. She heard the news while staying at a game lodge in Kenya at the age of 25, and her coronation in Westminster Abbey was watched by more than 20 million people. She was married to Prince Philip for 73 years until his death in April of 2021. And Charles, their first child, was born in 1948. He now becomes the new king. In 2015, Her Majesty passed Queen Victoria to become the longest reigning monarch in British history. And in February 2022, we saw the 70th anniversary of her becoming queen. And she made more than 250 visits to Commonwealth countries and was head of state in Australia and Canada and New Zealand. Winston Churchill was Britain's Prime Minister when she came to the throne, and Liz Truss was her 15th Prime Minister. The BBC is interrupting its normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. BBC Television is broadcasting this special programme reporting the death of Her Majesty the Queen. This is BBC News from London. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. In a statement, the palace said the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. The death of Her Majesty brings to an end the longest reign in British history, spanning 8 decades of immense change. Throughout that time, Her Majesty was the one constant presence in public life, a head of state who personified stability and reassurance. Her life had been dedicated to the service of the people, and her reign was characterised by a steadfast sense of duty. Elizabeth was just 25 when she came to the throne in 1952 on the sudden death of her father, King George VI, as Britain was still recovering from the Second World War. She was sustained by her 73-year marriage to the late Prince Philip, her strength and stay, as she once described him, who was at her side for 3 major Jubilee celebrations. Elizabeth II was the most widely travelled head of state in history, the Queen of 15 nations, head of the Commonwealth of 54 countries and territories. Her Majesty's death brings the second Elizabethan age to a close and a long and momentous chapter in British life, a reign marked above all else by a sense of service to others, a reign unlike any other in the long history of Britain and the Commonwealth. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, is with me as we report the news of the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. And one thinks immediately, Nick, first of all, of the loss for the royal family.
One does. This, for the nation, for them, this is an absolutely massive moment. The moment that so many people have dreaded for so long has come. It's a moment of great solemnity and national sadness. It's hard, really, fully to take it in. It's no great surprise, given her age and her declining health. But nonetheless, it is a very considerable shock to feel that she has died. Millions of people, I think, as they learn this news, will feel a sense of personal loss. And I think many people will find it rather disorientating. Let's just understand this moment. It isn't just the death of the longest lived, longest reigning monarch in British history, a monarch who has been there in the background to our lives for most of us, for all of our lives. It is the end of what I think history will judge to have been one of the most remarkable reigns in the 1,000+ years of the British monarchy, a reign which will be remembered and talked about in years to come. Now, whether you are a monarchist or not, and we know, as we've said this afternoon, that not everyone is, she was a monarch who earned the widest possible respect here in the United Kingdom and throughout the world. It's the end of the reign of Elizabeth II, a monarch who always put duty first, who brought dignity and decency to the highest office in the land, who embodied the best of qualities, who's been a focus for national unity and identity, and who has been the still, calm centre of stability and reassurance to this nation and the other nations of which she has been head of state for more than 70 years, while so much around her has changed. She has been a distillation of our national identity. She has been constant in an ever-shifting world, constant, steadfast, dependable, dutiful. These are all rather old-fashioned words, old-fashioned concepts even, but I think that they sum up what she brought to the role of monarch. We recall the pledge she made on her 21st birthday. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service. Well, she truly remained true to that pledge. It was a life of finely judged service, true to the principles of constitutional monarchy, driven by duty, sustained by faith. And we recall also the message that she issued when she reached her 70th birthday in February of this year. You remember the message that was issued? She wrote, "I remain eternally grateful for and humbled by the loyalty and affection that you continue to give me." She said, "I look forward to continuing to serve you with all of my heart." And she signed that message, "Your servant, Elizabeth R." Well, that servant has gone. The end of the reign of Elizabeth II. Elizabeth the Great, as many people will regard her. That reign has ended. And we have a new king.
Yes.
The crown passes invisibly, but immediately, imperceptibly. Charles is now our king and our head of state. Camilla is now Queen Consort. It remains to be seen what name he will take, but we will refer to him as the king, and he will lead the nation's mourning for his mother. As you say, she came to the throne just a few years after the end of the Second World War. She succeeded to the throne in 1952 after the death of her father. And on the night of her coronation, in a broadcast on the BBC, she said, "Throughout all of my life and with all of my heart, I shall strive to be worthy of your service." And as that message, and as the message she issued on the 70th anniversary of her accession showed, if there is one word that I think is the key to the success of her reign, I would suggest it's not actually duty, the word which is normally associated with her, it's humility. Because for all of the grandness of her position, here is the coronation, the imperial state crown being lowered onto her head by the Archbishop of Canterbury. For all the grandness of her position, it never went to her head. She had, I think, an instinctive understanding that as a hereditary monarch, she had to win the trust of the people of this country and the other countries of which she was queen. And that, I believe, is what she did. She gained it and she kept it. She kept the monarchy strong. Now, of course, there have been a few bumps along the way. It would be extraordinary if there hadn't been. Bumps which have almost without exception been caused by other members of her family. But she pursued her role with that sense of humility and by putting duty first. And she was at heart, people who knew her, it's funny to talk in the past tense now,
yes.
isn't it? She was a very down-to-earth, a straightforward and unpretentious woman, rather reserved, certainly in her early years. There was none of that sort of vainglorious and overbearing behaviour that we've sometimes perhaps seen with other members of her family. For 70 years, she's been the constant, unchanging presence in the background to our lives, the head of the nation, as she's sometimes been referred to, above politics, but with a shrewd interest in and a grasp of politics and of political figures. So we now look back on, and there will be so many tributes now, as people take this in, as they come to terms with their own emotions. And I'm quite sure there will be many people who are very emotional at this moment, as they learn of this news, the death of the Queen. But this nation and so many other nations will now pay tribute to this long life of service which has now ended.
Symbolised everywhere, Nick. The flags are being lowered and the rainbow along with the lowered flag at Windsor, the favourite home of the Queen. So many years. Flags lowered already at Buckingham Palace. And so many elements, Nick, of your appreciation and tribute will be echoed by political leaders at Downing Street. We're expecting Liz Truss to say something fairly soon. The Prime Minister will offer her own sympathy to the royal family, and she will, of course, have her own words of appreciation for the long service of Her Majesty. And there'll be other political leaders too wanting to pay tribute to a lifetime of service, a lifetime of humble commitment to duty, as Nick was saying, and of taking the role as seriously as it's possible to take it. Very much in line with the teaching that her father had shared with her all those years ago in Buckingham Palace. King George VI, very proud of his two daughters, and took a long time to offer the experience and learning to his elder daughter Elizabeth. And there you have at the railings of Buckingham Palace, they are in line with tradition posting the formal notice. And that notice will say that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died peacefully today at Balmoral in Scotland. The age of 96, the longest reigning monarch in British history. A lifetime of service to people in the United Kingdom, throughout the Commonwealth, and in many parts of the world. An example of leadership which didn't stray into the realm of politics, and for lots of people, the ideal symbol of what a constitutional monarchy should be like. Well, now the world has been told, and the official notice has been posted as the palace staff make their way back into what was the Queen's home It is now the home of the King and the Queen Consort, because Prince Charles is now King Charles. It remains to be seen whether he will call himself Charles as King, but we are assuming that he will. And this now is the home of the new monarch, the King, and his consort, the Queen Consort. Crowds still gathering at Buckingham Palace because the news has travelled very rapidly here and at Windsor and at all the other royal residences. But of course people will be following these events closely on their televisions and their mobile devices and all kinds of different means of spreading the news and social media as people come to terms with what's happened. And as Nick was saying memorably a few moments ago, it's a seismic event. It's the longest reigning monarch in British history who's left us at the age of 96, and it's not a surprise when someone of that age suffers ill health and eventually passes away. But what is left, of course, is the reflection on what was achieved and the kind of life that was led and the sense of duty and the sense of loyalty and, as Nick was saying, the sense of humility, which seems rather bizarre to say for a monarch, but someone who had a sense of service to others. And this was a theme that was repeated so often in the Queen's statements at great milestones in her life, and those 4 great jubilees, where she underlined the notion of service, to be at the service of the people, and to appreciate the fact that people were loyal to her as a monarch and appreciated the fact that she was of, well, incalculable value in terms of her service to Britain, having come to the throne at such a young age and with very little experience. At the age of 25, when she didn't expect to be in that position at all, her father suddenly dying in his 50s. A terrible blow, and then a huge burden for the young Queen to be bearing. But she did so, and with a strong sense of what the monarchy was meant to be, the sense that her father had shared with her. And as we said earlier, for those considering the nature of the reign, the longest reign in British history, it was in many senses a continuation of the reign of George VI. The crowds at the palace will have seen this formal announcement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral tonight and will be returning to London tomorrow. And that is the formal announcement to the world in the traditional way, the printed statement being fixed to the railings of Buckingham Palace. And that, when we see that, Nick, that is the chapter completed.
And the vehicles there outside Buckingham Palace are stopping. The word will be reaching people. People will be very shocked, I think, by this. I think it is very hard to take it in. But there is, as you say, the news. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon, so presumably she must have died before the members of her family arrived at Balmoral, but they will have known, as they drove in through the gates, they will have known that the Queen, their mother, or their grandmother, had died. It doesn't make any reference as to whether the King was at her bedside, but we do know that Charles and Camilla had travelled across to Balmoral Castle, so one presumes that they will have been there at the end. And the Princess Royal as well, one must assume, though they have not said that. And of course there will be many arrangements, but before the arrangements there will be all the tributes. And those will be on a scale that we have really not seen before.
No. They've started, Nick, already, as you can imagine. President Biden, the White House, he and his wife saying our hearts and thoughts go to the Queen's family and the British people, of course. coming from our strongest ally, so you'd expect the statement to be warm and sincere, as it is, but as you say, Nick, it'll be just the start of countless tributes from world leaders, religious leaders, and of course, I think it's right to say this, from millions of people, from ordinary people who will want to be sharing their sense of loss.
Yes, yes, and that sense of loss will be deep and it will be widespread. As we've both been saying, people will feel a personal loss, that a person who they in some way knew or felt they knew has gone, who was always there, who was this reassuring presence, this embodiment of stability and continuity, and who personified the unity of the United Kingdom. It is, as I think you used the word, it is a seismic event in terms of the United Kingdom, and of course it, I think, will rather add to that sense of flux that we have at the moment.
Yes.
Of political change with a new Prime Minister, of economic crisis with all the energy costs, gosh, who's giving a thought to that huge statement that the new Prime Minister made in the House of Commons today about that. There is war in Europe. Well, the monarchy, in one of those hard to put your finger on ways, is a stabilising and unifying force, and that will be the challenge now for Charles as king, and he, I'm sure, will want to act quickly. He will lead the mourning for his mother, for the Queen, but he will, I'm sure, also want to just indicate that he understands what is required as a constitutional monarch. He has already indicated that he does completely understand that it is a different role, that he will have to give up his interventions, but I think that he will reign in a slightly different way. I mean, the fundamentals are the same, but each monarch brings something of their own personality to the role, and I think that Charles will try to continue his interest in some of those issues without in any way allowing politics or a political scope to come into it.
I'm told, Nick, that we are expecting a statement from the new king fairly shortly. So when we have that, we'll bring it right away. And as we look at these rather nice images of Her Majesty, of course, engaged in one of the endless official engagements that she's done over the years, it's worth bringing in as well some remarks from the Dutch royal family, because the British royal family and the Dutch royal family have enjoyed close relations over the years. The Dutch royal family saying, "We remember Queen Elizabeth II with deep respect and with great affection. Steadfast and wise, she dedicated her long life to serving the British people. We feel a strong bond." This is the King of the Netherlands. "We feel a strong bond with the United Kingdom and its royal family, and we share their sorrow at this time. And we're very grateful for our country's close friendship, to which Queen Elizabeth made such an unforgettable contribution." King Willem Alexander and Queen Maxima and Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands offering their tributes. Just worth underlining the scale and the importance and the impact of what we are reporting today. It is a huge milestone in the history of the United Kingdom. The fact that the Queen, who was crowned back in 1953, has died peacefully at Balmoral in Scotland this afternoon. The King, that is King Charles, and the Queen Consort will be staying at Balmoral this evening, and then we will be expecting them to return to London tomorrow. And that's a statement also expected from the new King sometime in the next maybe 20 minutes or so. But these images remind us of those happy days which really do just set the foundations really for a hugely successful and productive reign. Coronation Day back in 1953, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, just on the right-hand side there, the Duke of Edinburgh just behind her. But the Queen, the young Queen, became Queen at the age of 25, acknowledging the huge crowd that had gathered on Coronation Day back in 1953. Well, we're looking at the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. And here we are in 2022 reporting on the Queen's death at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace formally making that announcement a short while ago, saying that the Queen, whose health was the matter of a bulletin earlier today, doctors expressing their concern, Queen died peacefully at Balmoral during the course of this evening. We don't have a precise time, but we do know that several members of the royal family were at Balmoral, and they were no doubt in a meeting with the doctors and the experts when they got there. And indeed the news came fairly soon after their arrival that Her Majesty had indeed passed away at the age of 96. Earlier today, they were saying that she was being kept comfortable in Balmoral. There was no sign of any move to hospital, no sign of any further intervention by doctors in a different kind of facility. All the care was being done at Balmoral itself. And indeed, a few hours later came the very sad news, which will affect many millions of people, that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96, having lost her husband, Prince Philip, back in 2021. And on the Queen's death, we now have a new king. Prince Charles will become King Charles, possibly, with a consort who will be the Queen consort, known as Camilla, the Duchess of Cornwall. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become king. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. We are expecting a statement from the new King fairly shortly. We're also expecting a statement from the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who visited the Queen in Balmoral just a couple of days ago and was able to accept the invitation to form a government in that audience, where the Queen was seen to be smiling broadly and looked very focused on the task at hand, albeit looking rather frail. Well, that was 2 days ago, and yesterday came the news that she was unable to fulfil an appointment with the Privy Council. That's the senior ministers in the new government of Liz Truss. It was to be an online meeting, but nonetheless, the Queen was judged to be too tired and she needed to rest. She wasn't well, and her doctor suggested last evening that that meeting should not be held, and she was resting last night. And by this morning, indeed, late morning, the Queen's doctors were clearly very concerned, and that the Queen's condition had deteriorated fairly rapidly. And then by lunchtime we had the statement that her health was causing particular concern. And then we saw the members of the family arriving at Balmoral. And shortly after that, within the past half hour or so, came the formal statement that Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. We have statements from lots of world leaders. We'll come to them in a second. The President of the Irish Republic, for example, Michael D. Higgins. The Queen visited the Irish Republic back in 2011. She was the first British monarch to visit the Irish Republic. It was a hugely successful meeting. I've got a very warm welcome there. Her Majesty, says President Higgins, served the British people with exceptional dignity. Her personal commitment to her role and extraordinary sense of duty were the hallmarks of her period as Queen, which will hold a unique place in British history. There aren't many who will disagree with that. That's President Michael Higgins of the Republic of Ireland. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has just issued this statement, which of course will be welcomed by Charles as the new king as well. He says, "May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in peace and rise in glory." Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. As she had done before, she reminded us of a deep truth about ourselves, says the Archbishop. We are a people of hope who care for one another. A very warm tribute and a sincere tribute from the Archbishop himself. I think we can bring a little more from the Archbishop, and it's a very eloquent tribute, as you'd imagine, from Justin Welby. "It's with profound sadness," says the Archbishop, "that I join the nation, the Commonwealth and the world in mourning the death of Her late Majesty the Queen. My prayers are with the King and with the royal family. May God draw near them and comfort them in the days and weeks and months ahead." The Archbishop goes on, "As we grieve together, we know that in losing our beloved Queen, we have lost the person whose steadfast loyalty, service and humility has helped us make sense of who we are through decades of extraordinary change in our world, our nation and society. And as deep as our grief runs, even deeper is our gratitude for Her late Majesty's extraordinary dedication to the United Kingdom, her realms and the Commonwealth. Through times of war and hardship," says the Archbishop, "through seasons of upheaval and change, and through moments of joy and celebration, we have sustained by Her late Majesty's faith in what and who we are called to be." The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, with that moving statement. We also have a statement from the King, from Charles, who became king on the death of his mother. And Charles says this: "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world." The tribute there by the new king, by Charles, who became king immediately on his mother's death. So the tone, as one would expect, is loving, it's warm, it's respectful, and it just underlines the affection in which the Queen was held. We are expecting the Prime Minister in just a moment, Nick, but that statement was moving, wasn't it?
It was, yes. My beloved mother, a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all the members of my family. Interesting that it's not signed as King Charles. There's no name on it. It has been suggested that he might take another name as king, but I suspect it'll be tomorrow before we learn that. But yes, it's quite hard to sum up the profound nature of this moment, isn't it, really? They have lost their mother or their grandmother. They must grieve privately, but Charles must now begin to assert himself and begin his reign. I'm sure he will travel around the country. He will, I mean, this is challenging. It would be challenging for anybody. And we're about clearly to hear now from the Prime Minister.
We are all devastated by the news that we have just heard from Balmoral. The death of Her Majesty the Queen is a huge shock to the nation and to the world. Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the Commonwealth from a small group of 7 countries to a family of 56 nations, spanning every continent of the world. We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. Her life of service stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United Kingdom and all around the world. She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many Britons. Her devotion to duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister. Throughout her life, she's visited more than 100 countries, and she has touched the lives of millions around the world. In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a great legacy. Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III. With the King's family, we mourn the loss of his mother, and as we mourn, we must come together as a people to support him, to help him bear the awesome responsibility that he now carries for us all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who was installed at Downing Street just a couple of days ago, having met the Queen in that audience, really presenting her own tribute with some personal elements in that, but also revealing something which we were hoping to hear, either from the Prime Minister or from the Palace, which is that Charles will be known as King Charles III, Nick, and that is at least confirming the title that he has adopted.
Yep, that answers that question. And of course, for him, for Charles, there will be conflicting emotions at this moment. Yeah. There is the great sadness that he refers to in his statement of the loss of his mother. But at the same time, this is the moment when he finally achieves his destiny. He is the oldest and longest serving heir apparent in British history. He will be the oldest person to become king in British history. Previously, the oldest person was William IV, who became king in 1830, aged 64. Well, Charles is 73. And he will know that this is a challenge for anybody to step into the position so successfully occupied for so many years by Elizabeth II. And he has had a long time to think about this. He's never spoken about it publicly because that really would not be appropriate. The only clue he has given is that he fully understands that the role of monarch is different to that of Prince of Wales. So he has assured people that he will not meddle, which is the one great concern that people have had about him. It was the one area in which, one area among many, that the Queen, Elizabeth, was so successful. She understood the limits, what a monarch needed to do, how far a monarch could go. And Charles, one can be confident, also must understand that. So he will reign in his own way, but within the constraints of the constitutional monarchy. So he understands that, though he may, I think, attempt to be a little bit more proactive than the Queen has been throughout, or the Queen was throughout her reign. He, I think, will attempt to use the convening powers. But that, again, that is really all for the future. He will, I think, travel around the country. He will want to establish himself, want to lead the nation's mourning for his mother, now that the reign, the long reign of Elizabeth II has ended.
I just want to share again the statement made by the new king. This is the statement by King Charles III, and he says, the death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. And Charles goes on, we mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country and the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. And during this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. A statement by the former Prince of Wales, now King Charles III, because the Prime Minister has confirmed that the Queen, now having died at the age of 96, has been succeeded by Charles and will be known as King Charles III and the Queen consort, of course, Camilla. Let's go to Downing Street then, where the Prime Minister Liz Truss has just delivered her tribute, and join Chris Mason, our political editor. The Prime Minister certainly wanted to pay tribute to the Queen's long record of service, Chris, but also wanted to, I suppose, introduce a little bit of a personal element, in the sense that she said that the Queen for her had been very much someone who'd inspired her over the years.
Yes, that's right, Hugh, and a Prime Minister just 48 hours in office, tasked with finding the words for such a profound moment in our country's history. Just picking out a few of the sentences that struck me in the statement from Liz Truss just a few moments ago. The rock on which modern Britain was built, she reflected about Her Majesty the Queen. Britain is a great country today because of her, and because of her stability and strength, that she encapsulated and personified, the Prime Minister said, the spirit of Great Britain. As you just mentioned in conversation with Nick, the news from the Prime Minister that the King will be known as His Majesty King Charles III. And then the profound solemnity and gravity of those final words from Liz Truss. God save the King.
When we look at the change that's now happening, Chris, because clearly there are big implications for Downing Street and government, given the very strong axis that exists between the office of the monarch and the executive and parliament in this constitutional monarchy that we have. What will be happening, do you think, now in terms of the administration in Downing Street? What are the things that they will need to come to terms with, given that we now have a new monarch?
It'll be a profound change, a significant change at a time politically of considerable flux. It is, of course, a new team that have moved into Downing Street, not just the Prime Minister, but so many of her senior advisors in the last 48 hours or so, themselves trying to work out how the very heart of British government and the British state on the political side operates. Now, within that and beyond that, in the broader governmental machine, are procedures and protocols in terms of the conversations that take place between Downing Street as an institution and Buckingham Palace, the monarchy, as an institution. But nonetheless, obviously, it's such a profound historical moment. Things will change. A Prime Minister who had just had a single audience with the Queen, that first audience also being her last one. And in future, of course, those audiences, they are gatherings that take place once a week where the Prime Minister heads to see the monarch and has a period of time privately in their company, knowing in the political world it being the one opportunity where you can talk very candidly to someone without the prospect of it being leaked, that in the future for the Prime Minister will be very different from the one that she might have anticipated, from the one that so many of her predecessors, 14 of her predecessors, have enjoyed, that conversation that they had with the Queen, more recently taking place remotely, traditionally taking place physically at Buckingham Palace, where Prime Minister after Prime Minister, 15 in total, including Liz Truss, were able to spend that time with the Queen and tap into a well of knowledge and savvy and wisdom about world affairs that was unprecedented. A stateswoman of a longevity greater than any other on earth. And with that, Prime Ministers would so often reflect in interviews and in their memoirs just how valuable a relationship that was. Firstly, as I say, because it was grounded in that sense of solemnity and privacy, but secondly, because of the wisdom and experience that the Queen was able to bring.
Chris, for now, many thanks. Chris Mason, our political editor. And as you can imagine, lots of political leaders are wanting to pay their own tributes. From Scotland, and of course, let's just underline the fact that the Queen passed away at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire. So the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, has been sharing her response to what's happened today and the Queen's death. She said it was a profoundly sad moment for the UK, the Commonwealth and the world. And then the First Minister goes on to say the Queen's life was one of extraordinary dedication and service. And she said, on behalf of the people of Scotland, I convey my deepest condolences to the King and to the royal family. First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, with the statement that she issued just a few moments ago. The time is 7:20, and you're watching this extended coverage from BBC News on this very, very sad day, because we are reporting the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, and the commanding presence in British public life over a span of 8 decades. She died at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire today at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has become King Charles III. Now, within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released the formal statement. It said this: the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. That is the brief statement stating the events of the past hour or so and the fact of the Queen's death at the age of 96 after the longest reign in the history of the United Kingdom. And Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, is with us. By now, Nick, of course, this news will be around the world. And that is why we are seeing, of course, responses from countries as far afield as Japan and the United States, and of course European countries, European Union. Those tributes will come in. But for the people of the UK, we mentioned earlier that of course we were thinking about the impact on the royal family. Let's dwell then on the impact on the people of the United Kingdom, for whom the Queen has been this symbol, not just of authority, but a symbol of real solidity and of consistency over the years. Taking that symbol away, albeit with a new monarch, King Charles III, who's a very familiar figure, but taking that symbol away will have an effect on people's lives, even those who are not dedicated monarchists.
It is a huge loss, and I think many people will find it disorientating, the feeling that this person who has been such a constant presence in the background of their lives, that this person is no longer there. It is hard, really, to take it in, to speak of her in the past tense, to fully appreciate that this reign, this longest reign in British history, is finally over. I mean, so many people over the years have said, we wish she could reign forever, we wish she could go on forever. Well, clearly not possible, but that reign ended this afternoon. At Balmoral, we now have both a new head of state and a new head of government in the Prime Minister. Who could have imagined that within the space of 48 hours? We will now await details of course, a state funeral, which will take place probably in about 10 days' time. That'll be the first full state funeral in the United Kingdom since that of Winston Churchill back in 1965. And Britain will mourn, and many people around the world will mourn also the passing of Elizabeth II. That presence who was there, the constant and reassuring presence, whilst so much around her changed. Every aspect of life, not just in this nation, but in every other nation around the world, has altered, but she was the one constant, dependable factor in so many of our lives, always there. If you think about the way in which culturally this nation has changed, it was monocultural when she came to the throne, multicultural now. It was very much empire-orientated, the United Kingdom in 1952 when she succeeded to the throne. There is the Commonwealth. The United Kingdom has, as it were, dallied with Europe and has sort of moved away from it. When she came to the throne, a majority of people believed that she was chosen by God. Yeah. There was still, of course, a much greater sense of deference. We're seeing some images here from the earlier stages of her life. She was, there she is, presenting the World Cup to Bobby Moore in 1966, and of course meeting so many American presidents there with the first George Bush, and pursuing her great passion of horse racing. In just so many facets of national life, the Queen was there. This dutiful figure, driven by faith, propelled by duty, with this sense of humility that we were talking about earlier. She was down to earth and straightforward, and as I said, she never let it go to her head. She realised that she was there by an accident of birth, and that she needed to win the trust and respect of her people, and that perhaps is something that not every member of her family has fully appreciated. Well, she did, in the same way that her father did, and in the same way I think that Charles has also appreciated that, because he has worked so hard. Prince Charles, you know, been a few controversies and difficulties for him, but he has set out during his time as Prince of Wales to win the respect of people and to show that he is worthy of the office and the position to which he has now succeeded. There he is with his mother. He is now mourning the loss of that mother and the loss of the Queen as he becomes king. Now, we must assume that the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has not, as it were, jumped the gun in naming him as King Charles III. It's not been confirmed by Buckingham Palace, but we must assume that that is correct.
Just as you speak, Nick, your timing is impeccable. Clarence House has literally, in the last couple of seconds, confirmed that it is King Charles III. So, well done on prompting that.
Very good.
Very good. So it is King Charles III, that's official. And I'm just going to interrupt a second, Nick, if I may, because Boris Johnson, who of course was Prime Minister until just a few days ago, has issued this statement. It's fairly lengthy, but I'm going to just read through it because well, you'll understand why. This is our country's saddest day says Boris Johnson. In the hearts of every one of us, there is an ache at the passing of our Queen, a deep and personal sense of loss, far more intense perhaps than we expected. In these first grim moments since the news, I know that millions and millions of people have been pausing whatever they've been doing to think about Queen Elizabeth and about the bright and shining light that has finally gone out. These are the words of Boris Johnson. She seemed so timeless, he says, and so wonderful that I'm afraid we've come to believe, like children, that she would just go on and on. And Mr. Johnson says, wave after wave of grief is rolling across the world, from Balmoral, where our thoughts are with all the royal family, and breaking far beyond this country and throughout the great Commonwealth of Nations that she so cherished, and which cherished her in return. As is so natural with human beings, it is only when we face the reality of our loss that we truly understand what has gone. And it is only really now that we grasp how much she meant for us, how much she did for us, how much she loved us. Boris Johnson continues, as we think of the void that she leaves, we understand the vital role that she played, selflessly and calmly embodying the continuity and unity of our country. We think of her deep vision, her wisdom, her historic understanding, her seemingly inexhaustible but understated sense of duty. Relentless though her diary must have felt, she never once let it show. And to tens of thousands of events, great and small, she brought her smile and her warmth and her gentle humour. For an unrivalled 70 years, she spread that magic throughout her kingdom. And then Boris Johnson ends his tribute like this. This is our country's saddest day because she had a unique and simple power to make us happy. And that is why we loved her. That is why we grieve for Elizabeth the Great, the longest serving and in many ways the finest monarch in our history. It was one of her best achievements that she not only modernised the constitutional monarchy, but produced an heir to her throne who will amply do justice to her legacy, and whose own sense of duty is in the best traditions of his mother and his country. Though our voices may still be choked with sadness, we can say with confidence the words not heard in this country for more than 7 decades. God save the King. The words of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister until a couple of days ago, and I'm bound to ask Nicholas Witchell, who's with me, that is quite a contrast to the tribute, the neat and elegant and sincere tribute that the Prime Minister paid, but that is of a different order, isn't it?
There is real feeling, isn't there? There is resonance in the words from Boris Johnson. He has clearly thought about that a great deal. Yes, she seemed so timeless, he says, and that I think is what a lot of us will be feeling at this moment. And as he rightly says, we've not heard those words for 70 years, God save the King. Well, we have to adjust and get used to the reality of that situation now, because that, sadly, as we mourn the passing of the Queen, we accept that the head of state is now the King. But yes, Boris Johnson, I think, capturing in those few hundred words what so many people, so many people will be feeling just right now.
Let's bring in our home editor, Mark Easton, because Mark, you again are in a perfect place really, given your brief, to talk a little about the change that this represents. It's been called seismic, it's been called great, it's been called fundamental. How do you read the kind of process and impact of change that the Queen's death will produce?
Well, Hugh, here at Buckingham Palace, you can see the way the public is already reacting. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people have already turned up. Applause breaking out. Just behind me now, people are pouring down the Mall, coming to pay their respects. King Charles III, as we must now learn to call him, talked about the respect and affection that the British people had for his mother. And you can feel that in the crowd here. It's a somber atmosphere. Some people, I have to say, are close to tears. This was a very personal relationship with a woman who embodied something very special about their country. She was, I think, the keystone in the nation's architecture, the solid and immovable piece that sort of defined the nation's image of itself. And that is why I think when that keystone is removed, this is a very difficult and perhaps a dangerous moment for the United Kingdom. We've talked a lot about constancy and consistency and the solidity that she brought to this country. But I think that one shouldn't think that constancy is the same as inactivity, because this was a queen like a fish swimming, keeping sort of still in a fast-flowing stream. She remained solid and still while everything was moving around her, and that required constant adaptation and change, and she put enormous thought into how she could, what she described as, ease the process of change for her people. People are arriving here. Her subjects are arriving at Buckingham Palace. Some have brought flowers already. What's interesting, I think, about this crowd, I think it says something very important about Queen Elizabeth. This is a crowd of every generation and every background. There are a lot of young people, a lot of people from ethnic minorities. It's a very mixed crowd, and she was a queen that was able to be a figurehead for people from whatever background in Britain. As I say, we've got tens of thousands of people here already. I think this is going to become the focal point for that national grief over the next few days. And we will remember, some of us, the extraordinary scenes here after the death of Diana. And I think we will see something not dissimilar with the loss of Queen Elizabeth. This is a huge moment for the country. I think it's going to be very difficult for people to adjust. I think that as well as sadness, people are feeling unsettled. And this was already at a time when there was quite a lot of foreboding about the winter to come. So I think this is going to be quite a moment for Britain, and a time for people to pull together and support each other.
Mark, thank you so much. Mark Easton with some thoughts there on what this event, what this loss means for people across the UK and indeed beyond. And as we look at these images, I have to say there are lots of very heartfelt and eloquent tributes being paid here in the UK and around the world. The former Prime Minister Sir John Major calling the Queen selfless and wise, with a wonderful generosity of spirit. He said he was greatly saddened the news of her death. The former Prime Minister Tony Blair: we've lost not just our monarch but the matriarch of our nation, the figure who more than any other brought our country together and kept us in touch with our better nature and personified everything which makes us proud to be British. And Mr. Blair goes on, she was not only the respected and loved monarch, she was respected because of the qualities of duty and decency and integrity and fidelity which she embodied, and loved because of the love and affection that she bestowed on us. And we will mourn her and we will miss her. That was Tony Blair speaking earlier on. Lots of other tributes from around the world. President Macron, the French president: Her Majesty the Queen embodied the British nation's continuity and unity for over 70 years. And President Macron says, I remember her as a friend of France, a kind-hearted queen who's left a lasting impression on her country and her century. And then President Zelensky of Ukraine, that troubled country, sending this message: on behalf of the Ukrainian people, we extend sincere condolences to the royal family, the entire UK and the Commonwealth, over this irreparable loss. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. And then we have the German president too, Herr Steinmeier, saying, Queen Elizabeth was a woman who shaped a century, and Her Majesty enjoyed the highest respect in the whole world. A very concise statement, but one that conveys the fundamental truth about the life and the times. Let's think about the United States. There are statements from President Trump, former President Obama, but I've just received this from President Biden, and this has just come in from the White House. So as we look at these images of the Queen's long life from her coronation back in 1953 all the way to this year in 2022, President Biden says, "In a world of constant change, she was a steadying presence and a source of comfort and pride for generations of Britons, including many who've never known their country without her." And that is such a powerful theme today, as Nick and I have been discussing. An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth, and the 7 decades of her history-making reign bore witness to an age of unprecedented human advancement and the forward march of human dignity. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all around the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. And we see the crowds gathering at Buckingham Palace, and they too, with their mobile devices, will be aware of lots of these tributes being paid as they gather there. And now that the formal announcement has been fixed to the main railings in front of the palace, as it is done at times of great events like this, happy events and sad events. She was the first British monarch, says President Biden, to whom people all round the world could feel a personal and immediate connection. Supported by her beloved Prince Philip, the Queen led always with grace, an unwavering commitment to duty, and the incomparable power of her example. And President Biden goes on to say she endured the dangers and the deprivations of a world war alongside the British people, and rallied them during the devastation of a global pandemic to look to better days ahead. Queen Elizabeth II, this is how he concludes, was a stateswoman of unmatched dignity and constancy, who deepened the bedrock alliance between the United Kingdom and the United States. She helped make our relationship special. And as a concluding thought, he says this: "In the years ahead, we in the United States look forward to continuing a close friendship with the King and the Queen Consort. Today, the thoughts and prayers of people all across the United States are with the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth in their grief. We send our deepest condolences to the royal family, who are not only mourning their Queen, but their dear mother, grandmother and great-grandmother. And her legacy will loom large in the pages of British history and in the story of the world." I have to say, they're very moving tributes. I haven't been able to come across a few of them yet, because I know they're just waiting there for me from the Obamas and President Trump and other leaders. But they are moving, they are eloquent. And Nick, they really do stop you in your tracks. And they just underline the fact that, you know, the appreciation for what the Queen achieved and what she represented is truly global. It's not, you know, we tend to talk about the Commonwealth. Of course, that's important. It's beyond that.
As Boris Johnson said, it's only when you lose somebody that you really appreciate just who they were and how much you valued them. And the same words are in so many of these tributes: grace and duty and dignity and constancy. She was someone who personified simple qualities like decency and tolerance, who encouraged politicians to be the best that they could be, who encouraged all of us really to be the best of ourselves, because she did embody those old-fashioned concepts. And she did that for decade after decade. And she was that most important thing for a monarch. She was someone who unified people. She brought people together. And the challenge for Charles now will be to continue to seek to do the same, particularly at this moment when there are pressures within the United Kingdom against unity. And so Charles, I think, will be very much aware of the challenges that he faces and the task that he must now begin.
Well, Charles's younger son, Harry, is, we understand, arriving at Balmoral just about now. I think we're expecting the arrival in a few minutes. Here we are, the entrance to the Balmoral estate, but the Duke of Sussex, who's travelling alone, we believe, because his wife, Meghan, is not accompanying him, but he's arriving. He's arriving. He didn't come with the main royal party earlier, with the Duke of Cambridge, his brother, and with Prince Andrew and with Prince Edward and the Countess of Wessex. He wasn't with that group. They flew up to Aberdeen quite a few hours ago, and they've been in Balmoral since then. They joined the Princess Royal and the Prince of Wales, who were already there at the Queen's side. So Prince Harry's arrival is considerably later than that. And indeed, it's quite a while after the official announcement of the Queen's death at the age of 96. But we understand that the Duke of Sussex, Harry, is on his way there, and he's about to arrive at Balmoral at this time, where he will join the other members of the royal family. And as we've already heard, the King, King Charles III, and the Queen Consort, they will be staying at Balmoral tonight. They're not returning to London tonight. We had that statement earlier from the King. And they will be returning to London tomorrow. We've also heard from the Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who paid her tribute to the Queen and thanked her for a lifetime of service, and reflected indeed the great sense of national sadness at the news that came today, because although the Queen was 96 and had health problems, these images will tell you everything about recent years, where of course she's really just done her best to carry on despite advancing years and health problems. And she and Prince Philip, who left us 2 years ago, were full of the joys during those Jubilee celebrations. And now we have some of the tributes already arriving. And they'll be arriving, of course, at Balmoral. They'll be arriving at Buckingham Palace. They'll be arriving at Windsor. So these will be local people who are used to the royal presence in Balmoral. They are very used to seeing the royal family around in these summer months. They know full well how fond the Queen was of Balmoral as a home and as a base. And they will be wanting to pay their respects as locals who tended to leave the royal family alone because they were used to seeing them around. And the Queen certainly felt very much at home there, having spent so many years there with her family and indeed with her parents when she was growing up. So sometime along this road we're expecting Prince Harry to arrive. It's going to be in probably one of those vehicles that we saw earlier, maybe a Range Rover or something of that kind, but they're still expecting his arrival there. And he will of course join the rest of the family, and they will no doubt be reflecting on the loss that they've suffered. They'll be sharing the sense of grief, and they'll be thinking as well about what the future holds with the new king, King Charles III. As Clarence House has confirmed, he wishes to be known King Charles III, who will be reigning with his Queen Consort Camilla, and thoughts already will be turning respectfully, sensibly but respectfully, towards the events of the next few days, leading of course to the state funeral for Queen Elizabeth, which will take place in probably 10 days' time, but we need to have that confirmed. The plans of course have been there for a long time. They always are. They've been revised over the years because that's how these things work, but they will need to be finalised given the circumstances, because of course the Queen has passed away at Balmoral in Scotland and not at Windsor, not at Buckingham Palace, so the arrangements will inevitably be adjusted in the next few days in the lead up to the state funeral itself. So there'll be some talk about that, and it's it's fine for us to talk a little bit about that, but what we're really doing today is reflecting on people's sense of loss and what's happened today, and the fact that British life has changed, the fact that the course of our history has changed, and that is symbolised by Buckingham Palace and that empty balcony tonight where the Queen has appeared on so many occasions, on so many happy occasions indeed, during Jubilees and the end of the Second World War with her beloved father and mother and sister Margaret. So it's been the scene of so many great national events when the crowds congregate around that palace to declare their support for the royal family, or indeed to express their sympathy in bad times. And the crowds are now building up. The news, which came a short while ago, clearly filtering through, and lots of people now wanting to just stand at the palace, look at the palace, want to be seen at the palace to express their sense of loss and to express their sense of sympathy with the royal family, with King Charles on the loss of his mother, and of course with the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and the Princess Royal, who've also lost a mother, and the Duke of Cambridge, who's lost his grandmother, as has the Duke of Sussex, who's on his way to Balmoral. Of course, a grandmother and a great-grandmother too. So there's generations of the royal family affected by the news today. That's before you start thinking about friends of the royal family and about generations of people in the UK who've known nothing else. You'd have to be in your 80s, basically, to be in any position to say that you could perhaps remember a time when the Queen wasn't sovereign, wasn't the monarch. And here we have dusk in London and the Queen Victoria Memorial glinting in the evening light, with the crowds gathering around that memorial and congregating at the gates and the railings of Buckingham Palace. The palace, which is, of course, the symbol of the royal family in central London, but is not the usual residence of the royal family. That is Windsor Castle, which is usually a short ride away in a helicopter or indeed a car. And the Queen used to be very familiar with that journey, being ferried back and forth from Windsor to Buckingham Palace for the business of the day. And then, of course, Buckingham Palace, the great backdrop for so many of the huge ceremonial and state events that we are familiar with. And they include the Queen's Birthday Parade, which will become the King's Birthday Parade when that next happens, and that famous processional route along the Mall all the way to Horse Guards Parade, with the Queen until the mid-1980s was on horseback. She loved the horses, of course, as we know, not just riding, but also the horse racing, on that processional route for so many birthday parades, and indeed was in a position to enjoy the end of the parade in 2022 for the Platinum Jubilee. So many happy memories, and the crowds gathering are aware of them, but on a day when they're reflecting on a huge loss in our national life, the death of Queen Elizabeth II, who's died at the age of 96. I'm in a position to tell you what the leader of the opposition has been saying. Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, has issued his own statement in the past half hour or so. We mourn the passing of a remarkable sovereign, says Sir Keir. It's a deep private loss for the royal family, and all our thoughts are with them at this time, and the nation shares in their grief. We will always treasure Queen Elizabeth II's life of service and devotion to our nation and the Commonwealth. Our longest serving and our greatest monarch, says Sir Keir. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon. As Britain changed rapidly around her, this dedication became the still point of our turning world. So as our great Elizabethan era comes to an end, we will honour the late Queen's memory by keeping alive the values of public service that she embodied. For 70 years, Sir Keir Starmer says, Queen Elizabeth II stood as the head of our country, but in spirit she stood amongst us. Yet another moving tribute from our leaders there, one from Boris Johnson earlier and Liz Truss, and this one from Sir Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. There are others too, of course, from President Biden, President Obama, former President Trump, President Macron. All of these tributes coming in, all of them worth reading. They will no doubt be on the BBC News website for you to see, to just keep up with the tributes being paid, because they are moving, they're eloquent and they are thoughtful. And it's well worth you having a look if you have a moment to do that. Now, you're watching BBC News, and this extended coverage continues this evening on the 8th of September 2022, because Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom, the commanding presence in British public life for a span of 8 decades. The flags have been lowered at Buckingham Palace. The Queen died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire at the age of 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has formally become King Charles III. And within the past few minutes, Buckingham Palace released this formal statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and the Queen Consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. And Charles, the new King, said this: "The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." It's coming up to 8 o'clock in the evening. The lights are on in central London. The flags have been lowered. The crowds are gathering around the memorial by Buckingham Palace. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, still with me. And up at Balmoral, we are in a position to say that Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, is either just about to arrive or has just arrived. He's certainly within minutes of arriving at Balmoral Castle itself. Some of the vehicles now pulling up, and they are the advanced vehicles, and there's the vehicle, the cavalcade, moving its way into Balmoral Castle itself, and we believe that is Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. And Nick, you're watching this with me, and that means that Harry has now joined his brother, yes, and his father and other members of the family.
Yes, as autumn descends on this bleak September day, there at Balmoral and also at Buckingham Palace, how striking are those images outside the palace, people feeling the need to come together at this moment in the nation's history, the day on which the Queen of the last 70 years has passed away. People need, I think, just the solace, the comfort of being with other people. The nation will begin its mourning, bells will be rung and guns will be sounded and church services will come together. I remember the words that were used, I think, by a previous Archbishop of Canterbury, who talked about service untiringly done, duty faithfully fulfilled. Everyone will have their words about the reign, the duty of Elizabeth II, as we all just pay our tributes now to a life of duty, of humility, of decency, as the process, the transition now to this new reign gets underway. And I expect we will hear from the new King tomorrow. There will also, of course, be an accession council when the Privy Council comes together. Not the full Privy Council, because there simply isn't room these days, but they will come together and they will confirm the succession, and they will, I imagine, at some point hear from the new King. And those statements by him will be important to set the tone for his reign, paying tribute to his mother on behalf of his family and the nation, but also setting out his aspirations, his wish, his ambition to be a force for unity and continuity and stability at a time when stability perhaps is in rather shorter supply than it has been at many other times. It is unsettling, as Mark Easton said. It is disorientating, and many people will feel that, and they will need to be reassured at this moment.
Nick, thanks again. Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent, with some thoughts there on the significance of today and the loss that people have suffered today and the country has suffered, and the fact that we no longer have a queen. We have a king, King Charles III, who has acceded to the throne immediately, the moment that his mother passed away. Lots of tributes which we can still share with you from political leaders, from religious leaders. For example, the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, who saw the Queen so many times, of course, during her period as Prime Minister, simply said this: "I want to place on record," says Theresa May, "that Her Majesty devoted herself unreservedly to a life of service." And that really does echo what so many others have been saying. It's interesting as well that the Duke of Cambridge, a new title, the Duke of Cambridge, the Duchess of Cambridge, William and Kate, of course, now being referred to as the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall and Cambridge. So we'll see lots of these adjustments as the evening goes on. And here on BBC News, we will, of course, be bringing you more tributes from around the world and reflecting what people in communities across the United Kingdom are saying tonight after the death of the Queen. We'll take a pause for now. We'll be back for an extended edition of BBC News at 10, but we're going to join my colleague Clive Myrie now for more special coverage following the death of Her Majesty the Queen. Goodbye for now.
The longest reigning monarch in British history, Queen Elizabeth II, has died at the age of 96.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. God help me to make good my vow.
Over the course of 8 momentous decades, she witnessed social and economic change on a global scale. As Princess Elizabeth of York, she came to the throne at the age of 25, following the sudden death of her father, King George VI. During her lifelong reign, the Queen dealt with no fewer than 15 prime ministers. The first, Sir Winston Churchill, through to Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair and Boris Johnson. As head of the Commonwealth, she became the most travelled monarch in history, head of state of 15 countries at the end of her reign. The Queen's death comes just over a year after the passing of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, her consort for more than 70 years. Over the decades, the Queen was greeted by millions of people worldwide and met her subjects on thousands of engagements in the UK and well beyond. She was last pictured at Balmoral on Tuesday, asking Liz Truss to become Prime Minister. Now, as the crown passes to a new king, Charles III, the Queen's death will be deeply felt by her family, by people across the United Kingdom and millions around the world. Good evening. The reign of the longest-serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom has come to an end with the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace made the announcement just after 6:30 this evening. The Queen, who was 96, passed away at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire. Members of the royal family had made the journey there on the news she was gravely ill. The Queen had been a commanding presence in British public life for more than 8 decades, and her eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become King Charles III. Buckingham Palace had issued this statement. The Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon. The King and Queen consort will remain at Balmoral this evening and will return to London tomorrow. Well, in the last hour, His Majesty King Charles III released this statement. The death of my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of the greatest sadness for me and all members of my family. We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. Well, joining me now is Nicholas Witchell, our royal correspondent. Nick, I am 58 years of age. I've known no other monarch. And there are millions of people, we'll show the pictures a little bit later on, millions of people around the country, thousands outside Buckingham Palace, some outside Balmoral as well. They have known no other monarch either. This is a moment of profound change as well as profound sadness.
It is. It's a massive moment for the country, and I think people are just taking it in, absorbing it, and I would imagine that many millions of people are very emotional about this. The tears will flow in many households tonight as they just take in the news that this figure who has been there throughout most of our lives, in the background to our lives. I'm nearly 70 and I too have only ever known Elizabeth II on the throne. But the transition will take place. We have a new king. The crown passes imperceptibly, invisibly, immediately. He doesn't have to be sworn in. There doesn't have to be any ceremony to ensure that he is the new monarch. He is, as soon as one monarch dies, the crown passes. There will be challenges for him, there is no doubt. Anyone succeeding to such a huge figure who has occupied the throne for so long would face quite a challenging time to take up and pick up the threads of the constitutional monarchy in this country. But I think that this nation is, at its heart, feels very comfortable with the monarchy. Not everybody does. There are many people, of course, who don't, but the overwhelming majority do. And I think that Charles will rely on those instincts and the efforts that he will make in coming days to reassure people that he will reign in the style of his mother. There will be some differences because each monarch has an element of their own personality. He will be, I think, slightly more proactive than she was. But that's all for the future, really. Tonight, millions of people in this country and around the world will be reflecting back and feeling a deep and profound sadness. We'll be just appreciating what it is that has been lost to the United Kingdom. The monarch who has been so dutiful, who has embodied all the best of qualities of tolerance and decency, who has stood for unity and constancy and continuity. That reign has ended, and it is a moment of great sadness and solemnity for the United Kingdom.
For the United Kingdom and indeed her own family. Nick, for now, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to our Scotland editor, James Cook, who is at Balmoral for us now. James, what can we say, really? Members of the family are there, and by Her Majesty's bedside when she passed away, we assume. Are all the immediate members of the family now with you?
Yes, the senior royals have all arrived here. Within the past half an hour or so, the sun, shrouded in cloud, set here on the Balmoral estate, setting too on the end of an era for the United Kingdom and for the world. And minutes after it did so, a car swept through the gates, several cars in fact, one of them we believe containing Prince Harry, to join his brother Prince William and his father the King in mourning for Queen Elizabeth, a monarch who has a special place in the heart of this nation, but who in return had, in her own words, a deep and abiding affection for Scotland. A moment, of course, here behind these gates for a family, first and foremost to mourn, but a moment too for a nation to reflect on an extraordinary reign and on the end, the severing of links with the Second World War, the existential threat to this country which this nation survived, and also to the British Empire, which in many ways the Queen embodied for some of her reign. She also, I think it is fair to say, embodied the union of the crowns between Scotland and England, that union dating all the way back to 1603.
James, thank you. Our Scotland editor there, live at Balmoral. We can go now to Mark Easton, who is outside Buckingham Palace for us. Now, Mark, we were seeing a little bit earlier some of the pictures of the crowds gathered where you are, many of them having been there in the rain throughout much of the day on the news that the Queen was gravely ill, and now many more people have turned up on the news that she has now passed away.
Yes, absolutely, Clive. People are seeking some way of connecting with this extraordinary moment in British history, and despite the rain, which is really quite heavy now, there are tens of thousands of people outside Buckingham Palace. The crowd has been growing over the last few hours, people streaming down the Mall. In the Mall as well, we've got a line of black taxi cabs, the cabbies wanting to pay their tribute. It's a very respectful, very somber scene. You'll see quite a few camera lights are on, but I've also heard applause and even at one point 3 cheers. Now, we don't know whether those were moments where the crowd wanted to show their appreciation for the Queen that they have lost, or whether they were perhaps greeting their new king, King Charles III. But whichever, it is a crowd which wants to be part of this moment. And it is a huge moment, I think, Clive, for this country, because the Queen was this solid, immovable piece of the nation's architecture, the keystone. And without that, there will be a sense, I think, of unease, of uncertainty. And it is in a moment when people will want to come together, will want to be with others, to share this moment and to see it through.
Mark, thank you. Mark Easton there at Buckingham Palace this evening, where crowds have gathered and have been gathering throughout the day. If you are just joining us, Buckingham Palace has announced the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the longest serving monarch in the history of the United Kingdom. and a commanding presence, of course, in British public life over 8 decades. Her Majesty died at Balmoral Castle in Aberdeenshire, and she was aged 96. The Queen's eldest son, Charles, at the age of 73, has now become king. Our royal correspondent, Daniela Ralph, now looks back on today's events.
Tuesday, the 6th of September, the last photographs of the Queen, 96 years old and still at work. Meeting the new Prime Minister at Balmoral, a duty she had been keen to fulfil, and one we now know was her final duty after 7 decades of public service. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, a number of the Queen's family arrived at Aberdeen Airport. Her grandson, the Duke of Cambridge, was first to emerge, followed by her daughter-in-law, Sophie, the Countess of Wessex, and then her 2 youngest sons, Edward, the Earl of Wessex, and Andrew, the Duke of York. Prince William drove the family group to Balmoral to join his father, the Prince of Wales, Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall, and Princess Anne, who were already there with the Queen. Within an hour and a half of their arrival came news from Buckingham Palace. As is tradition, the announcement of the Queen's death was attached to the palace gates by 2 footmen, as tribute began.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. She was the very spirit of Great Britain, and that spirit will endure. She has been our longest ever reigning monarch. It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70 years. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished, by saying the words, "God save the King."
And also from the Leader of the Opposition.
For the vast majority of us, the late Queen has been simply the Queen, the only Queen, above all else, our Queen. As we mourn her loss, we should also treasure her life, our longest serving and greatest ever monarch. Above the clashes of politics, she stood not for what the nation fought over, but what it agreed upon.
Throughout the day, there had been growing unease about the Queen's health. In the Commons, as Keir Starmer stood up to speak, opposite him, the Prime Minister was being told of the Queen's condition. Information passed to Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, who left her seat for a while to discuss the development, before the Speaker of the House addressed the chamber.
I know I speak on behalf of the entire House when I say that we send our best wishes to Her Majesty the Queen, and that she and the royal family are in our thoughts and prayers at this moment.
Cheered by onlookers, one of the Queen's last royal engagements was in July, with her daughter, Princess Anne, opening a new state-of-the-art hospice in Berkshire. But these kind of visits had become rare over the past year, as the Queen relied on her walking stick, her mobility compromised. The royal household had tried to adapt to keep her active and visible. A golf buggy at the Chelsea Flower Show helped keep the Queen comfortable. But she had become noticeably thinner and frailer, something that severely limited her involvement in her own Platinum Jubilee celebrations, with her family increasingly representing her. At the weekend, her son stood in at the Braemar Highland Games, always a favourite event for the Queen that she reluctantly missed. Like so much of her life, the decline in her health was played out in public. Duty may have got harder to manage physically, but mentally, even emotionally, the Queen remained engaged and working to the very end.
Daniela Ralph with a sum up there of the events of the day. We're now joined by the former Conservative Prime Minister, Sir John Major. Sir John, it's very good of you to join us here on BBC News at this moment in time. Fears, of course, had been mounting throughout the day on the news from the Queen's medical team at Balmoral. What are your thoughts now on the passing of Her Majesty?
Well, it is heartbreaking news. It's news that one day we knew we would have, but we always hoped it would be delayed and would be some way away. It's very hard to take it in, that radiant smile which lights up a room and lights up a country is just not going to be live for us there anymore. Very hard to imagine. Most of the people in this country can remember nothing other than the Queen as monarch. Many of those who are elderly remember faintly the former king. But this is an enormous change for this country. It's a very big moment in history, a key pivotal moment. And I think there will be many tears shed tonight and over the next few days for Her Majesty the Queen.
I wonder, Sir John, given your interactions with the Queen, obviously as Prime Minister, what your personal recollections are of meeting her?
There are so many recollections, and in many ways so different from what people might imagine. The private meetings that the Prime Minister has with the Queen, which are perhaps scheduled for 45 minutes, in my experience never lasted remotely under an hour and often some way beyond it, which weren't entirely serious matters, just discussing the matters of the nation. There was a great deal of amusement in them, there was a great deal of humour in them, there was a bit of gossip in them. And apart from that, the serious matters that were discussed, I think people would have been extraordinarily surprised if they realised the depth of information the Queen had about the lives of people in every conceivable part of the United Kingdom. She was always extraordinarily well briefed. And on foreign affairs, of course, she would often say, if there was a difficulty of a foreign leader, well, I met him many years ago, or even I knew his father. There was always a wise word to be had. And those meetings with the Queen were one of the better parts of a Prime Minister's week.
I mean, that stability, that continuity that she brought, not just to the monarchy, I suppose, but to all of our lives, on being on the throne over such a long period. What are your thoughts on that now that she's passed?
Well, the continuity was very important, but I think there were other things as well. The example, the duty, the selflessness, the way in which other people were put first, the way in which she handled crisis with great stoicism when they occurred, as they occurred a number of times during her reign. They were all examples to people about how to behave in their own lives and examples for our country. And what you found going around the world is that the Queen was the face of the United Kingdom. When people around the world spoke of the Queen, they actually meant our Queen. That was the status she had in every part of the world. It was truly remarkable.
So, John, you talked about the stoicism she showed in times of crisis. We think back, of course, to 1992 and her Annus Horribilis speech, the fire at Windsor Castle as well. Her fortitude in dealing with those issues and those problems was something that the British people came to admire greatly in her, along with that sense of duty.
I think they were right to admire it. I sat along from her when she made the Annus Horribilis speech in 1992. A great deal had gone wrong, and there was, as you say, that dreadful fire in Windsor Castle, which many people didn't receive with the sympathy perhaps they should have done. But the Queen understood that. She put her head down and she quietly, silently, uncomplainingly got on with her job. There are very few people who would have handled it with the aplomb that she did. And I think that was in part because of her experience and in part because of her natural nature. She knew what one had to do to be a monarch. She knew when to keep out of controversy. She knew when to advise in private. She was almost faultless in the way in which she conducted the monarchy. And she leaves behind the monarchy in very good shape and a son who's been brought up to follow in precisely the same footsteps as King Charles III.
I wonder too, Sir John, about the affection with which she was held right around the world, particularly within the Commonwealth. And you travelled and you've seen the great affection that she had, and there will be millions across the globe now who will be particularly sad today.
Well, I have seen that affection at close quarters. Some 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I was invited by the Queen to set up and chair the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust. a charity to commemorate her 60 years on the throne. And we raised money from across the Commonwealth, and I asked the Queen what she wished us to do with the money that we had raised in her name. And she gave us two tasks. The first was to cure avoidable blindness across the whole of the Commonwealth, and the second was to seek out young Commonwealth leaders in every nation of the Commonwealth, 54 at the time, and help prepare them for leadership roles in later life. It was entirely a selfless request on her behalf and entirely typical of her.
Remarkable. Sir John Major, thank you very much indeed for giving us your reflections on Queen Elizabeth II, who passed away today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Buckingham Palace. There we are, live pictures there, the lights lining up the front, and crowds of people. A bit difficult to make out, but you can see the odd umbrella there, the rain still coming down, flashlights from people taking pictures, and of course the press gathered there. And we're thinking around about a few hundred people, possibly even more, on the news that the Queen has died. That notice from Buckingham Palace announcing the news posted around about 6:40, 6:45 today, I think. The official announcement coming from Buckingham Palace that the Queen had died came just after 6:30, and it was after a RAF plane arrived on the tarmac at Aberdeenshire Airport to take members of the royal family to the Queen's bedside at Balmoral Castle. And these still the scenes, and you can see we've got a bit more light there now. You can see how many people have gathered. Quite a few, even with the rain pouring down there. Many people wanting to pay their respects. Many people fearing the worst, of course, after that rather alarming bulletin from the Queen's medical team coming out of Balmoral in Scotland just after 12:30 today, saying that there was concern over the Queen's health, but that she was comfortable while she was in the castle. And of course, a good few hours later, we got the news that the Queen had passed away. The very latest scenes there, outside Buckingham Palace. Well, the Queen spent much of the past few years at Windsor Castle, of course, living and working there throughout the coronavirus pandemic. Our correspondent Adina Campbell is there for us now. Adina, we've just seen the pictures outside Buckingham Palace. Hundreds of people, probably thousands of people out there gathered. What is the scene like where you are?
Well, hundreds of people have gathered here in Windsor tonight. Nearby, close to the High Street, others near the historic Long Walk. People of all ages, families have come out with young children, local residents, tourists have all come together to mark this day, and they've been paying their respects. Plenty have been leaving flowers. You may be able to see some of those floral tributes behind me, and others have lit candles. There was a poignant moment shortly after the announcement was made when a rainbow came out in the sky, and that's when people stood still. They were silent, they were reflective, and the news really then sunk in. And that happened shortly after the flag had been lowered, not quite at half-mast, but it had been lowered. This is a community that has had a deep, close connection with the Queen for many years. This was her main residence. She had spent a great deal of time here, particularly over the last 12 months, since she started experiencing those episodic mobility problems. And then, of course, she had spent a long time here with the Duke of Edinburgh before he died in April last year. They had been isolating here. People here are experiencing a sense of loss here tonight in Windsor. We've seen some emotional people who have been unable to hold back tears, consoling each other, hugging each other. And of course we know that this is a town that has rich royal roots. Just recently the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have moved here. We know the Duke of Cambridge is up in Balmoral, but we know tonight the Duchess of Cambridge is looking after their 3 young children because they started their first full day at school. So this is a community in shock. They are sad.